In her text, The Trigger, What Gives Rise to a Story, Sparks presents four main concepts: effective writing triggers, the development of these triggers, creative obstacles, and narrative reflection. Effective triggers are everywhere and ubiquitous. They can present as an expression, a piece of dialogue, an object, or a place. In other words, anything can trigger. Spark discusses the significance of triggers in the context of creative writing. What constitutes as an effective trigger to creative writing practice? The phrase "beauty is in the eye of the beholder" applies here, as anything that stimulates curiosity has the capacity to serve as a catalyst to a writer's story. For example, overhearing an exchange of words. Whether this serves as an effective prompt is up to the listener, as they have the opportunity to capture the fleeting moment of eavesdrop dialogue and channel it as a creative expression. The real context of the conversation may remain unknown, but as Spark emphasizes, a successful trigger is less in its content and more in its mystery. Another example of this, such as encountering shattered glass. What events led up to its break? What if someone is responsible? Just a brief encounter may ignite a stream of curiosity, allowing space for creative intervention. Too much detail may hamper the imagination and consequently constrain the ability to creatively write. Spark mentions various authors' experiences with triggers. Henry James's remark operated as a useful analogy to this idea of less being more, stating that the fine penetration of a needle is due to its sharp point. An instrument of larger size ruins the subtleness of its prick. Thus, if our questions are answered, if the detail is less of a prick and more of a stab, veracity emerges, diminishing mystery, and thus the effect of the trigger. In order to prompt a creative flow, you have to be the one to provide the answers. Triggers may present in the same form, but their effect remains fundamentally idiosyncratic. Spark employs the concept of a relationship as a recurring motif throughout her text, emphasizing the inherent subjectivity in both relationships and triggers. While one individual may exhibit interest, another might show no curiosity at all, leaving no room for the imagination to wander, and then, well, a dead end. Sparks delves into the common experience of feeling uninspired and explores practices that can be employed to provoke the trigger. Guided imagery as one, a commendable pedagogical tool that Sparks describes as involving endless permutations of objects and living things to stimulate a cohesive narrative. An example of this exercise is the act of entering a dark room and observing the first thing that catches the eye when the lights are turned on. Another notable approach is by taking note of what captures attention when driving to an unfamiliar place. Subsequently, write about these observations. What draws your interest? What does it remind you of? This structured approach prevents writers from veering into a spiral of doubt, as the short time between the trigger and the act of writing effectively discourages the intrusion of expectations. Now on to a significant part of the writing process, being the obstacles that one may encounter and the potential inhibitions that can accompany it. Writers often grapple with what Tanner aptly describes as the writer's paradox, a state in which the writer remains uncertain about what they're going to say until it is finally expressed. Facing a multitude of pathways for their characters, choosing one becomes, as Spark emphasizes, a vigilant exercise. Spark further captures this uncertainty to be a lack of criteria. To combat the fear of making the wrong choice, she suggests the writer doesn't focus on the next big juncture and just aimlessly writes until inspiration eventually arises. A prime example of this is having a character enter a room or turn a corner. Seemingly insignificant actions fill the time spent waiting on the arrival of an epiphany. It's at this point of uncertainty that the writer may trigger their creative process once more, themselves discovering the unraveling events as they write and naturally revitalizing the story.
After finishing the story, the writer undergoes reflection and editing. Here the writer may notice their story has evolved into a piece where the initial source of the narrative is unidentifiable. Spark's reading effectively highlights the value of hindsight, as the writer is able to determine what compels them through the accumulation of triggers. In summary, Spark's text is a useful guide to navigating the writing process, particularly beginners who are unsure of where to start.